The cry in the ruins armored suit, scratched from battle and time. His mission was simple: scan for lost tech and report back. But Jake didn't trust simple things. Not anymore. He moved past a crumbled wall when he heard something. Very soft. Almost like a whisper. He stopped. He held his breath. The wind blew again. Dust floated in the air. Then he heard it again. A cry. High-pitched. Weak. Like a scared child. Jake raised his rifle and turned slowly. His boots crunched on broken glass. He followed the sound into a half-destroyed building. Inside, the ceiling was cracked open. Light fell through in narrow beams. The crying grew louder. Jake's heartbeat quickened. He found the source near a pile of collapsed stone and steel. Something small was trapped beneath. He dropped to his knees. A tiny hand reached out. "Hold on," Jake whispered. He pulled out a tool from his belt and started cutting through the wreckage. Carefully, slowly, the hand didn't move. The child underneath was still alive, but barely. After a few minutes, he cleared enough debris and lifted a broken beam. Underneath was a small alien child. Blue skin, glowing freckles, and wide golden eyes. She looked no older than 5. Her long black hair was tangled and full of dust. She didn't speak, just stared, scared, shivering. Jake gently reached out his hand. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The child blinked. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then slowly, she placed her tiny fingers in his palm. Jake carefully picked her up. She was light. Too light. Like she hadn't eaten in days. His AI drone buzzed in. His ear. "Warning, human, unknown alien species, not safe to engage." "Shut up," Jake muttered. He wrapped the girl in his jacket and looked around. The area wasn't safe. Too open. Too exposed. "We gotta move," he whispered. He ran, through the ruins, carrying her in his arms. The girl didn't cry anymore. She just rested her head against his chest, eyes half closed. Far above, hidden in the shadows of a broken tower, another pair of golden eyes watched them. Jake found a small cave nearby. It was hidden under a fallen statue, surrounded by jagged rocks. He slipped inside and laid the girl down gently. He gave her water. She drank like she hadn't seen it in days. Then he opened a ration pack and offered her some soft food. She ate slowly, eyes still watching him with fear and wonder. Jake sat back against the wall and took a breath. "What the hell happened to you?" he asked softly. The girl didn't answer. She just looked at him, then crawled a little closer. She reached out and touched his arm. "Dumb." Jake froze. "What?" The child smiled. "Just a little." "Duh," she said again and hugged him. Jake looked down at her, confused, but something inside him warmed. Something soft. Something he thought had died years ago. He wrapped his arms around her gently. "It's okay. I'm here." Outside, the wind howled. Through the alien city, and somewhere in the distance, the girl's mother, the alien widow, felt a strange energy stir in her heart. A whisper, a connection. Her daughter was alive, and with a human. Her eyes opened, her fingers clenched into fists, and her journey began. The mother in mourning far across the desert plains, under a twilight sky painted with deep purples and dying stars, she stood alone. Hilari. Once a queen, now just a shadow. She was tall, graceful, and carried herself like royalty, even if her cloak was torn and her shoes covered in dust. Her skin, once glowing with pride, now shimmered faintly under the moonlight like cracked crystal. Her eyes, those deep golden eyes, were hollow with grief. She had buried her husband 3 moons ago. A soldier, a warrior, killed in the last human bombing, and with him, their daughter. At least that's what she believed. But today, everything changed. Hilari had been meditating near the ruins of the temple tree when it happened. A sudden pulse, a whisper across her mind. A soft thread of light, faint but real. Her daughter, her blood, still alive. She fell to her knees, gasping, pressing her palms to the cold ground. Her mind trembled, her breath caught. Impossible, she whispered. But she felt it. Not just in the soul bond that once connected mother to child. No, this was stronger. Deeper. Something more. Powerful than before. Someone had touched her daughter's soul. Someone not from her world. She stood slowly, her eyes glowing with purpose. And she did what no widow was supposed to do on her mourning day. She walked. She traveled by foot. Through cold valleys and broken metal fields. Every step brought flashes, visions, her daughter's tiny laugh, the way she clutched her father's fingers, the final scream when the building collapsed. She had accepted the child's death, had screamed, had wept, had cursed the skies, but now? That scream echoed again in her head, but this time, it ended differently. This time, there was a second voice, a man's, soft, strange, not alien, not hers, not one of the tribes. Human Elari gritted her teeth. She had every reason to hate humans. Their bombs tore her city down. Their machines shattered her people. Her husband's body was never recovered, only his burning armor. And now, her daughter was in human hands. She should have burned with rage. She should have sworn revenge. But her heart, traitorous and trembling, whispered something else. What if he's protecting her? As the twin moons rose above the mountains, Elari reached the outer edge of the ruined city, the same city she once ruled. Now it was a graveyard. She climbed the broken steps of the palace's remains. The wind howled around her like a scream from the past. She closed her eyes and listened, not with ears, with her bond, with her soul. A soft warmth flickered, east of the palace, in the lower ruins. She followed it, stone by stone, wall by wall, through the dust and the memory of fire until she stopped, there, hidden beneath a fallen statue, a cave entrance, covered by vines and thyme. She stepped closer, silently, and what she saw broke her. Inside the cave, a small fire flickered. The human sat with his back to the wall. Dirt-stained clothes, tired eyes. And in his arms, her daughter, wrapped in a jacket, resting peacefully on his chest, alive, safe, smiling. Elari didn't breathe. She didn't blink. She just watched. The man brushed a strand of hair from the child's face, then whispered something soft in his alien tongue. The girl replied with a sleepy mumble and buried her face against his chest. And then, she said it. Da. Elari's knees buckled. Her child had called him father. She covered her mouth to stop herself from making a sound, but a tear escaped, and it hit the cave floor. Drip. The sound was small, but loud enough. Jake looked up, saw her. Their eyes met, gold to brown, grief to confusion, mother to stranger. Neither moved. For a long moment there was only silence, only the fire crackling between them. Jake slowly raised his hands, showing peace. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't speak. The girl woke, sensing something. She looked up, at her mother, then at Jake, then back again. She didn't cry. She reached her hand out to Elari, but didn't leave Jake's side. That's when Elari knew. Something had changed in her daughter, and something even deeper had changed in her. She stepped inside the cave, not as a queen, not as an enemy, but as a mother, lost and found. A shelter in the sand. The cave was quiet. The fire had turned to glowing embers. The air held a strange weight, like time itself had paused to watch what would happen next. Elari sat on one side of the cave, her long fingers resting gently on her knees, eyes locked on the human across from her. Jake sat opposite her, legs folded, arms protectively around the little alien girl asleep in his lap. She didn't stir. Even in her sleep, her tiny hands gripped his shirt, as if she'd fall through. The world without it. Neither adult spoke. But everything said too much. Ilari's heart was racing. This was her daughter. Her only child. The last light in her broken galaxy. Yet here she was, wrapped around the chest of the very species she had cursed in her prayers. The man, Jake, seemed unsure, careful, like a wild animal trying not to spook another. She studied him, dirty boots, torn sleeves, a scar on his chin, but his eyes were soft, tired, human, and full of something strange. Honor. Jake finally broke the silence. "I didn't know she was yours," he said quietly. She was alone, crying. I just couldn't leave her. His words meant nothing to her. She didn't speak English. But the tone, the regret in his voice, she felt it like heat. She didn't respond. Not with words. Instead, she gently touched her own chest, then pointed to the child. Jake nodded. "You're her mother." Ilari's jaw tightened. She nodded back, slowly. He swallowed, looked down at the child. "She's strong," he said. "Braver than me." Ilari tilted her head. Slowly, she reached out. Jake flinched. Just a little. She paused, then touched the child's forehead with a glowing hand. A soft hum of energy pulsed through the air like a heartbeat. The girl stirred but didn't wake. Ilari whispered something, in her language, a prayer, a name, a blessing, then her hand lowered, and her eyes, finally, met Jake's without hate. Something had shifted. That night, they slept without peace. Ilari remained half awake, her mind flashing with memory, the sound of bombs, the last breath of her husband, the silence after the blast. She remembered digging through ash for her daughter's body. She remembered the day her people told her, "Let go. She's gone." But now, the girl was breathing, smiling, safe, because of a human. At dawn, Jake stepped outside the cave. Sand stretched in every direction. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the air was already hot. He walked to a small hill, scanned the horizon with binoculars, and cursed under his breath. Movement. Dust clouds. Someone or something was coming. He turned quickly and ran back inside. Ilari was already awake. The child still slept beside her, curled like a kitten. Jake made eye contact and used gestures, pointed out, then drew a line across his throat. Enemies. Ilari didn't panic. She simply nodded and stood, grabbing a hidden blade from her cloak. The metal shimmered with old alien runes. Jake picked up his rifle and slung the girl gently over his shoulder. "We need to move," he muttered. Ilari didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. They moved together, human and alien, through narrow canyons and dead wind tunnels, the child safe between them. They didn't speak, but they didn't need to. She watched his back as he walked, strong shoulders, alert, focused. He watched her shadow, graceful, silent, sharp as a spear. Enemies didn't know it yet, but if they came, they wouldn't just face a human or a widow. They'd face a father who had something to protect, and a mother who had already lost too much. By nightfall, they found shelter in an abandoned transport pod buried in the sand. It smelled of rust and memory. Inside, the child finally woke. She looked up at both of them, then smiled. She reached for Jake's hand, and then for Ilari's, and placed both together. Jake blinked. Ilari froze. The child giggled and rested her head in Jake's lap again. Jake looked at Ilari, unsure. She looked at him too, longer than before, and for the first time in the silence of metal walls and desert wind, she smiled, just a little, not because he was human, but because maybe fate wasn't cruel after all. between fear and faith. The stars blinked above them, like ancient watchers. Inside the buried pod, all was quiet except the sound of slow, peaceful breathing. Jake sat with his back against the wall, rifle resting beside him, eyes half closed. His chest rose and fell gently as the child slept across his lap, curled like a cat in warmth. Across from him sat Elari, silent, unmoving, but not asleep. She watched him, studied him, not with anger, not even with suspicion anymore. With confusion, because something inside her heart, something she had tried to bury with her husband, was waking up again, and it scared her more than any enemy. In the past, she had believed her life was written in stone. Marry a warrior, raise a child, die in war. That was the way of her people. Love was duty, honor was survival. But what was this? This human, this Jake, had no blood tie, no tribe bond, no reason to risk his life. Yet here he was, protecting a child not his, offering food before he ate, shielding them both without asking for anything. She had seen men fight bravely. She had seen kings fall, but never had she seen a stranger become a father in just days, and not just to her daughter, to her heart. Jake opened his eyes slowly and caught her staring. She looked away. He cleared his throat. "You okay?" She didn't respond. Of course not. She didn't understand the words, but something about his tone, gentle, low, settled in her chest like a soft song. He pointed at her, then made a sleeping gesture. She shook her head. He raised an eyebrow. Then, surprising even himself, he smiled. "You're a queen, huh? You probably don't sleep when there's a lowly soldier nearby." She tilted her head at the word queen, her expression unreadable. He chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, you've got that look, like you could stab me without blinking." Elari stared at him for a long second, then made a slight motion with her fingers, a half-smile in her own language. Jake laughed softly. "Well, I hope you wait till morning to kill me. The kid likes me." The child shifted slightly in her sleep and murmured, "Duh." Elari's eyes softened. That one word had cracked her armor more than any weapon. Later that night, she moved closer, just a little. Not enough to touch, just enough to feel his warmth. The pod was small and the desert cold was creeping in. Jake didn't flinch. He could smell the faint scent of her skin, something floral and metallic. Not human, but strangely calming. "You miss her father? Don't." "You?" he whispered. Of course, she didn't answer, but her eyes closed. Her breath shook. Jake lowered his head. "Yeah, I miss people too." He looked at the child. "I didn't save her because I'm a hero," he said, voice quieter than ever. "I saved her because I couldn't save someone else. Not before, not on Earth." Elari turned to him slowly, feeling the truth behind his words. She couldn't understand every sentence, but pain was a language older than words. Then came the moment, soft, sudden, sacred. She reached out and placed her hand over his. Just one touch. Her fingers were cool. His skin, rough and warm. He didn't pull away. She looked into his eyes, so human, so full of scars and softness, and without speaking, she showed him everything. The fire, the burial, the days of silence, the moment she felt her daughter's soul touch hers again, and the moment she saw him. Jake closed his eyes. Let the moment pass through him. The pain, the healing, the strange, fragile connection that didn't need a translator. They sat like that for a while. No fear, only faith. Just before dawn, Jake stirred. Footsteps, distant, light. Too many. He looked up. Ilari's eyes opened instantly. She had heard it too. Without a word, they moved. The child remained asleep, wrapped tightly in Jake's jacket. Jake loaded his weapon. Alari unsheathed her glowing blade. Outside the pod, silhouettes moved across the dunes. Hunters, mercs, not human, not her, people either. A third party. Jake turned to Alari. He pointed at the child, then at her. She shook her head. She placed the child back in his arms and whispered something in her language. "You carry her light now." He didn't understand, but he understood the look in her eyes. She wasn't running. She was choosing. Choosing to stand with him. And Jake realized in that moment something terrifying and beautiful. This wasn't just rescue anymore. This was family. And if the world came for them, they'd face it together. The worship of a broken queen. The morning came quietly, as if afraid to disturb what was growing between them. A new warmth filled the air, not from the sun, but from something unspoken. Something neither Jake nor Alari dared name yet. They had survived the night. The hunters had passed, no gunfire, no blood, just silence and starlight, and the two of them standing side by side, human and alien, warrior and queen, watching the desert breathe. Now the child slept peacefully under a torn, thermal blanket. Jake sat nearby, sharpening a dull combat knife against a flat rock. His hands moved, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Alari stood a few feet away, her back to him. She faced the rising sun. Her silver-white cloak fluttered in the wind, catching the golden light like the wings of some forgotten angel. She had said little since the night before, but Jake felt it. A shift. She was no longer watching him like a stranger. She was watching him like something more, something sacred. When she turned to face him, there was no hardness in her gaze, only memory. She stepped closer and knelt, graceful, proud, yet somehow humbled. Jake raised an eyebrow. "You all right?" She slowly reached into her cloak and pulled out a small, glowing stone, shaped like a tear, pulsing with soft blue light. She placed it between them and looked at him. Jake stared at it. "What's this?" She tapped her heart, then touched the stone, then tapped the child's chest, then pointed to Jake. "I don't," he started to say, but then she pressed her forehead gently to the ground before him. Jake froze. "What are you doing?" he whispered. Alari stayed in that position, bowed, silent, breathing slow. It hit him like a wave. She wasn't asking for help anymore. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was honoring him. Jake stared at her, stunned. He was a soldier, a scavenger. He'd made mistakes. He'd watched friends die. He had blood on his hands. He was no savior. Yet here she was, kneeling like he was something divine. "I'm not a god," he said softly. "I'm not even a good man." But Alari slowly lifted her face, eyes glowing faintly, and placed her hand over her heart. Then she said a word. Soft, ancient, almost a song. "Karen Thera." Jake blinked. "What?" She pointed at him, then whispered again. "Karen Thera." Later, when the child awoke and played in the sand near the pod, Alari sat beside Jake and pointed to the horizon. She drew 3 lines in the dust with her finger, then tapped the middle one. Jake watched quietly. Alari placed her hand over the line and said something in her language. "I was once this." Then she drew a circle around the line and crushed it gently under her palm. Jake leaned forward. "That was your kingdom?" She nodded, then pointed to the child, then him. Then drew 2 new lines side by side. Her gaze met his, fierce and soft all at once. Jake swallowed. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me." But he did. He felt it in his bones. That night, as the child slept again between them, Alari told him her story, not in words, but through touch and sound. She sang in whispers. Her voice was low, haunting, and beautiful. Each verse carried memory. Her wedding. The laughter of soldiers around firelight. The day she held her daughter for the first time. The night her crown shattered in the ruins of war. And then, The silence. The cold silence that followed her husband's death and the loss of her child. Jake listened in stillness, not moving, not interrupting, just receiving. At the end of her song, she reached out and pressed her palm to his chest. Over. His heart? He didn't flinch, didn't speak. He just took her hand and held it there. Their heads slowly leaned closer. Not to kiss, not yet, but to understand. And in that moment, Jake saw not a queen, not a widow, not an alien. He saw a woman reborn in front of him, not because she was weak, but because she had chosen to trust again, to believe again, and it was him she believed in. Later, as they sat under the stars, the child curled between them, Jake whispered, "I don't deserve this." Ilari tilted her head. He smiled, sad and warm. But maybe that's what makes it real. She didn't understand the sentence, but she reached for his hand anyway, held it tight, like it was the only truth left in the universe. The ones who hunt, they had almost started to believe peace was possible. 3 days passed. No drones, no gunfire, no scent of war in the wind. Jake had built a shelter from scrap just outside the pod. Ilari planted energy stones around the area, ancient relics that hummed softly like singing shields. The child laughed again. Not just smiled, laughed, freely, like nothing had ever hurt her. Jake couldn't stop watching her, and Ilari couldn't stop watching him. She still hadn't kissed him, but her presence had changed. She no longer sat across from him. She sat beside him, close enough for their shoulders to touch, close enough to hope. But peace doesn't last long in broken galaxies. Not when something powerful begins to grow. And what they had, this strange little family, was powerful. Too powerful for the ones who still lived in fear. It started with a sound, not loud, not obvious. A metallic whisper. Jake was the first to hear it. He was sharpening a blade while Ilari hummed an old lullaby. He paused mid-motion. The hair on his neck rose. Ilari felt it too, an ancient instinct wired into warrior queens. She stood quickly and scanned the hills. Then she saw it, a ripple in the sky, like light bending where it shouldn't, a shimmer of cloaking tech. She reached for her blade. Jake didn't ask questions. He grabbed the child and pulled her behind him. "Someone's here," he said, knowing she didn't need to understand the words. The first shot came fast. It burned through the air like lightning, slamming into the pod wall. Sparks flew. The child screamed. Jake covered her and rolled. Ilari launched herself across the sand, throwing her blade with a shriek that echoed like a war cry. The blade sang through the air, piercing one of the cloaked figures in the chest. Dropped, visible now, masked, armored, branded with the mark of the Black Claw Syndicate, a group of bounty hunters known for selling refugees and royalty. Ilari's face hardened. "They're here for me," she said under her breath. Jake fired 2 shots from his rifle, covering her as she retrieved her blade. More shadows moved in the dunes. 5. No, 6 of them. They were fast. But Jake and Ilari were faster. They didn't just fight together, they moved like one body, one soul. Jake provided cover. Ilari danced through the sand, slicing through attackers like a storm wrapped in silk. The child hid behind a broken satellite dish, watching through tears. One of the hunters tried to reach her. Jake saw. Time slowed. He moved without thinking, dropped his rifle, ran, tackled the hunter so hard they both flew off the edge of a dune. They landed hard. Sand flew everywhere. Jake punched. Again. Again. Blood. Not his. The hunter's helmet cracked. Jake didn't stop until the man stopped breathing. When he returned to the child, he was shaking, not from pain, from fear. She had almost been taken. Again. He picked her up, held her close. "It's okay," he whispered. I got you, I got you." But his voice trembled, and Ilari saw it. When the final hunter fell, silence returned, except for Jake's ragged breathing. He sat down heavily on a rock, the child in his lap, his hands red with blood. Ilari walked to him, graceful, bloodied, glowing from battle. She knelt. Not like before, not in worship, but in devotion. She reached out and wiped the blood from his face. Jake stared at her. His voice was hoarse. "I thought I lost her." Hilari didn't reply with words. She leaned forward and placed her forehead to his. Their eyes closed, and for the first time he felt her power, not her blade, not her crown, but her soul. She was more than a queen. She was a mother, a warrior, a woman, reborn in the fire of love, and she was choosing him. That night, they buried the bodies in silence, not out of respect, but to give the desert back what it gave them: pain. They built no fire, just sat close, protecting the child between them. Jake looked at the stars. "I don't think they'll stop coming," he said quietly. Ilari didn't argue. She simply nodded. Then she took his hand, held it tightly, and whispered in his language, broken but clear. "Then we fight. Together." A new name. A new world. The desert had changed. It was no longer just a land of sand and broken stone. It had become sacred, not because of what had been buried there, but because of what had grown there: a father, a mother, a child, a family, born, not of blood, but of choice. Weeks passed. No more attacks, no more shadows. Jake had fortified the pod, turned it into a home. He used salvaged metal and stone bricks to build walls strong enough to protect something precious. Not a base, not a bunker, a sanctuary, the kind you build when you've already lost too much to ever lose again. Ilari planted memory flowers, soft silver petals that only bloomed under moonlight. Each one carried the soul of a fallen ancestor, according to her belief. But now she whispered new names into the soil, not the names of the dead, but of the living. She planted one for her daughter, one for herself, and one for him, Jake Carter. 2. Man who had no reason to stay but did. The man who could have sold her daughter, but saved her instead. The man who had no crown, no blade, no ancient title, but who had become everything. They taught each other. Jake showed her how to fire a plasma rifle. Ilari taught him how to feel the desert wind and know if something dark was hiding beneath it. Their hands touched more often now. Not by accident, not in battle, but in peace. Quiet moments, her fingers brushing against his as they passed tools. His knuckles softly touching hers before sleep. There was no kiss yet, not because they feared it, but because they were already deeper than a kiss could go. The child spoke first, not in full words, but one new name. She stood one day, looked at Jake, and said, "Theron." Jake blinked. "What's that?" Ilari smiled softly. "Theron nice means home." Jake's heart paused, not hero, not protector, not father. Home. The galaxy, of course, did not stop spinning. War raged in far-off systems, empires fell, new kings rose, but in the quiet edge of the dunes near the bones of an ancient city, stories began to spread, of an alien queen who had survived the fall of her line, of a child who had returned from the dead, and of a human who had no people, no flag, and no army, but who was being called Karanthera across the stars, the one who restores light. Ilari's people, those few who still survived in hiding, sent word. Some wanted her back, to lead, to reclaim her throne, to start again. But when they came to the desert, they didn't find a queen in armor. They found her sitting beside a man smiling, teaching their daughter how to read starlight. And when they asked her, "Will you return to lead us?" she pointed to Jake and simply said, "I already follow someone greater." Jake didn't understand the full ceremony. He didn't understand the alien prayers, didn't know why they placed sand in his hands and whispered into his ears. But he stood still. He let them. And when the sun rose, they gave him a new name. Theron Volek, the human flame, a symbol, a story, a legend. And that night, when the child slept under the stars, Hilari came to him. No blade, no armor, just her real self. She sat beside him, and this time she didn't hesitate. She placed her hand on his cheek, leaned in, and kissed him, not quick, not rushed, but full of everything unsaid, every scar, every tear, every second they had survived to reach this moment. When their lips parted, she whispered, "You were never just a man to me." Jake smiled, tired and alive. "And you were never just a queen." They held each other in the desert night, their daughter safe between them, and the stars blinking softly above. As if even the heavens had paused to say, "Look, something beautiful lives here now." And so the story ends. Not with a battle, not with a crown, not with fire, but with a human who saved an alien child and was worshipped not as a god, but loved as a home.